Welcome to the CLC 23 Grammar Screencast lecture. In this pre-lecture, we're going to be covering verbs of the infinitive, as well as a review of comparative and superlative adjectives, as well as covering comparative and superlative adverbs describing a verb, and of course, indirect statement clause. All right, here's the infinitives you need to memorize. We've already learned the present infinitive from last year. Now we're going to learn the present infinitive passive. That means the subject is being acted upon. So instead of laudare, to praise, it's laudari, to be praised. Videre, videri, to see, to be seen. Audire, audiri, to hear, to be heard. Now, there are some differences in the third conjugation. They shorten to just a long I, because the ending is really just, the conjugation vowel re. Why does it shorten? Because they're common. 3 and 3I are common. But Reverend Greg, that looks a lot like the perfect indicative active I sent or I captured. Well, the ending does, but look at the stem. The stem is a present stem. It's not a perfect stem. It's a present stem. So therefore, that's where the difference is. Now, for here, the perfect infinitive signifies, in the next verb chart, perfect stem. You take the perfect stem plus isse, perfect stem isse, perfect stem isse, perfect stem isse, perfect stem isse, which means to have heard or to have praised or to have been, etc., etc. Now, to create the passive, now we'll be covering these more in depth in usage. You would use the participle, which we've already learned in chapter 21, plus esse, participle plus esse. That would be to have been praised. Now, generally speaking, you will not see it in the nominative, but this just gives it, just for consistency's sake. All right, well, what do we use the infinitive for? We've already seen it with complement clauses, subordinate to an incomplete verb. I want to go to the store. It shows a current or future action. But we're going to be learning at the end of this lecture about the indirect statement clause, which is how you can signify when somebody is saying, thinking, or doing something. A little bit of review on the adjective, comparative, and superlative. There are 3 degrees of the adjective. Positive is found in the glossary, good. And then we have the comparative, which we learned in chapter 9, which is gratior. So in other words, you take the stem and then you have an eor. Eor, eorem, eore, eori, eoris, eores, eores, eoribus, eoribus, eorum. And the neuter, gratios, gratioris, gratiore, gratioriis, gratiora, gratiora, gratioribus, gratioribus, gratiorum. Please note, with the comparative, it follows what declension? Well, it follows the third declension, feminine, masculine, and then neuter. This one is the tricker. A lot of times you'll see that US and you'll think it's a nominative second declension, but that IUS tells you it's a comparative. Superlative, we've already covered. Present stem, a positive stem plus isim plus the same endings that you would see in a first, second, and second neuter. Gratissima, a. Now, we've already covered these. Let's play more with the comparative. Now, for adverbs, remember an adverb is modifying a noun. So in the positive, for good, bad, great, small, the comparative makes it better, worse, greater. There are some irregulars, minor, smaller, plures, more, but you generally see the same endings. And then finally, the superlative, you are dealing with, as we've seen before, optima, us, sort of a little irregular, pessima, us, plurima. These are somewhat irregular, but you kind of use them because they're you get used to them through usage. That's why translation is important. Now, to form the adjective will form the adverb. Adjective modifies nouns, adverbs modify verbs. So, as we've seen before, you would put an E there. So for the positive, clare, lewe, celeriter, sometimes ter endings. So those are fairly straightforward. Now you can form the comparative adverb. So if you could say more clearly, it is using the neuter singular accusative form of the comparative. The comparative adverb and the comparative adjective are the exact same form. More swiftly, more prudent, more wisely, so that ending. So in other words, the comparative adjective and the comparative adverb are the exact same form in the accusative singular. How do you tell the difference? Well, if you have a neuter, to tell the difference, you have to see if it is being used as an adverb. For example, Cypius, more often, too often. Not too often, it's rather often. In comparative, adverb or adjective can be used with quam to tell ablative, degree of difference, or difference. So in other words, let's take a look at it. In other words, you can tell it's a comparative adjective if it's modifying a noun, if there's something also that's neuter or accusative singular. In this case, there clearly isn't. It's the adverb. So the horse runs faster, and then you can use an ablative comparison phrase, sometimes with ob, but often not. Ob homine, than a man. You can also form it with a quam clause. So the horse runs swifter, or more swift, describing the swiftness. Quam homo, you could use a quam clause, than a man. Generally speaking, the homo could be mostly nominative because there's no extra verb there than a man runs, understood. But sometimes if you're comparing an accusative, that could also be accusative as well. All right. Now, the comparative adverb will either be used with quam plus the nominative, or the case of what it's comparing, or then an ablative, quam with an ablative comparison phrase. The horse runs swifter than a man. So when you see the comparative, look for an ablative or quam clause. Now let's play with indirect statement clauses. Indirect statement clause. In English, we indicate what people say or thought through use of quotation marks or a that clause. Think of it as a that clause. Mark said the hamster is flying, or that Mark said that the hamster is flying. So therefore, an indirect statement clause is what a person says, thinks, or judges, perceives. And then we have an indirect statement clause. We could use inquit, says, and then we directly use quotation marks. Oftentimes not, though. So what you need to discover the indirect statement clause is a verb, governing verb of information in the superordinate clause. Hear, know, say, believe, announce, know, write, see. Anything that deals with head verb. Anything you do with your head. And then infinitive clause with the accusative standing as the subject phrase. As such, we've seen the accusative stand as the subject phrase before, but the difference is with the indirect statement clause, you now have translation of aspect and tense. For example, you could say Caesar said that the boy carries a book. Caesar said that the boy was carrying a book. Or Marcus knows that the boy is carrying a book. See the infinitive, the accusative, head verb. Cornelius thinks that the boy has carried a book. Well, why does it change? And then, of course, Aurelia saw that the boy had carried a book. Well, why is it different? Had carried, has carried, is carrying, was carrying. These are infinitives. They haven't changed. But what's changed? Well, the head verb tense has changed. Present, past, past, present. And what we are going to be focusing in this chapter is when the head verb is present, you take the tense from the head verb and you put it to the infinitive. Present infinitives are generally progressive or simple aspect. Is sending or sends, is being sent or is sent. And then the tense clearly comes from the head verb. All we're focusing on in this chapter are present tense head verbs. Let's play with it. So, audit, hears. Who hears? Well, he, subject phrase found there. Here's what? We look for the infinitive, and there it is. If the tense of audit's present, so is the tense of the translation of the indirect statement clause. It's quotative because it's indirect statement clause. Is coming or comes. Who comes? The accusative plus infinitive subject phrase.